Well, I think we'll get going. Thank you all for joining us in this, our first of a long series of Insightflow events, the cafe community, as we're calling it. We're aiming to bring you joy, interest, delight about research and the business of research. And delighted to welcome my very first guests here this evening. Before we start, my name is Graham Ruddock. I am the founder, or one of the founders of Insightflow. And Insightflow is a business that we're just finishing the MVP of, which will help increase the impact of market research in the industry, to help connect researchers to each other and to their business clients, and to help speed up the process of producing market research and of, in the end, hopefully speeding up the whole process of research. I'll invite my guests and introduce my guests. So my guests, first of all, Gideon Barker, who is the head of Insight, or has for the last 10 years been the head of Insight for what was Profundo Research and is now Customer IQ, which is a bit of a clue in the name there. Gideon's renowned for his passion for connecting with clients and for making sure that research connects with clients. And one of his focuses is real focus on driving real client impact from research. And in fact, it was Gideon who coined the phrase, the insight adoption gap, which we at Insightflow rather like and have completely and unashamedly hijacked from him. So I do apologize. Well, I don't apologize. Sorry, not sorry.
It's yours to have. Don't worry. So catchy.
Gideon has been already a very supportive and kind friend of Insightflow, for which we're very grateful. Our second guest today is Zoe Kelleher, who is currently Client Success Director at Invika. Her focus there is on working with cross-functional teams to deliver consultancy, experience design, and support services, and a big and busy role. But perhaps in some ways more relevant immediately to us, but prior to this, Zoe was the managing director of Web Credible. Now, for those of you who don't know Web Credible, they were one of the sort of original and best known of the user experience agencies in London, and had a brilliant reputation for delivering well evidenced, well researched, well thought through, and really quite groundbreaking user experience design to a whole host of European clients. And Zoe was part of the team that sold Web Credible to Invika. So welcome, Zoe. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
And last and certainly not least, Amanda Wigington, who spent nearly 20 years with with timing, rising through various insights position to ultimately become the group strategy director. And Amanda's got an unrivaled knowledge of insight and research within a big organization and how it should work within a big organization, and has recently launched her own consultancy to help to help organizations do the same thing. So thank you very much. I must also say that Amanda is on the advisory panel of Insightflow, for which we're enormously grateful. Thank you very much. And thank you all three of you for coming. So to start, the insight adoption gap. And I think one of the things that we found in our research as we're looking around as Insightflow is that there's an awful lot of people who feel that there is a lack of connection between research and impact in business. That there's a lot of brilliant research done that doesn't make a difference. And it was actually when we were starting to look at that we found Gideon and the brilliant insight adoption gap concept. And I think this feels as though this is a big conversation. So Gideon, starting with you, what is the insight adoption gap? And first of all, why does it matter?
I think back to the early conversation that we had when we first got connected. I mean, personally, I think this is something I've observed, I guess, throughout my career, and I've spent time in supply organisation in agencies as well as client side. And I think we're going to come on to how to fix it, but I would say it's kind of 50-50 on both sides, client and supply side, in terms of what needs to be done to fix it. But what is it, and why is it important? That's the question. I mean, it's a gap. It could be a vacuum, some inertia that exists between of research and insights and recommendations, and then the action that could be taken as a result. And maybe inertia or a vacuum is another way to think about it, because I think I do see that time and time again, of research being delivered, but I guess the opportunity to change, to generate action is missed, and it's a shame. Why is it important? I think it's a shame. It's a shame on the industry. I think it probably impacts negatively on the research industry, on the insights industry. I haven't got any data to prove that, but that's what I certainly feel. Certainly on my perception of the industry. I think throughout my career, various people and organisations have tried to understand and capture the return on investment of research and insight, and it's very difficult at the best of times. But I think that when you've got this gap that exists, then it means you can't see what the impact of what you've done. I'd love to be able to talk to clients about, you spend £2 on research, you get £3 back, but there are various reasons why you can't do that. One of them is the fact that the link between research delivery and action taken, it for me isn't there, and I think it probably limits the amount of opportunities we have as research suppliers. It probably limits the opportunities that in-house researchers have to create impact in their organisation.
Absolutely. And Zoe, as somebody who was delivering fantastic and great research, which I know about a lot about having worked with you on some of these projects, is this something you observed, that you got your teams were suggesting fantastic things and that the customers were either not listening or were not able to listen?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's probably a range of things here, because often I think we were very lucky at Web Credible because the clients that came to us actually generally did understand the value of research and what it brought to the table. But in terms of what they did with that research, or how many people within the client organization felt the same way, varied greatly. So absolutely, it was something that you should do. It's a box ticking exercise, but really understanding in a client organization why they are doing that research is crucial. I know we'll come to that later, what researchers can do to help bridge this gap. But that's definitely the first thing, to understand what is driving that research. Is it a tick box exercise, or what exactly are they expecting to come out of that research? Because again, those expectations vary greatly from, something amazingly innovative that's going to come out of a little, 12 user piece of research, or is it a validation, or is it to test proposition? There's so many different means of doing research and reasons for doing that research, and what comes out of it. The insights can feel tiny but result in something absolutely huge. And again, the insights can be huge but actually result in something quite tiny. And it's hard to pin down. It's a bit like what Gideon is saying. There's no way of saying spend £2, you'll get £3 back. It's often quite hard to pin down exactly what will come out of research. But for me, generally it's magic, or there's magic in there. If you look hard enough, you can find that magic from research.
Fantastic. And Amanda, is somebody who is perhaps on the other side of it, although I suspect your role inside the organisation was probably one that was slightly bounded by similar frustrations. Did you see this? Is this something you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally I think having worked client side for so long, I think you have to know what that sort of value is that you deliver to a business. And actually, I would say, I mean, if you look at businesses that do insight, let's call it that, really well versus those that don't, it is about those that are answering specific business objectives where there's real clarity and it relates directly back to the bottom line or the business strategy. But also it's where researchers are doing the research to make a difference, and a meaningful difference. So that is to drive action, change behaviour, could be to make more money, it could be to influence the sort of strategy. And where that's not happening, you get a bigger gap. And so I would say that if you look at those businesses that do it well, and I'm thinking of Tesco's actually right now, live in the, actually, if you look at what they do really well, they've got that really close connection with their customer on a constant basis. It's linked in. They've got really strong relationships with all of their key stakeholders. It's being used. They're really accountable. They know the value of every piece of sort of research that they do. And I think being aware of that value that you can bring to an organisation is so important. And, you know, my job, I always think, is to sort of narrow that adoption sort of gap, so that you're part of the team. And it's an interesting one, but I think of myself as a business leader first, rather than an insight specialist. And I think that's a really, really important distinction, is that you have to be so focused commercially on what that business needs. And that's why that gap is so important, actually, being aware of how you can influence that gap and change it.
Well, I mean, in fact, that, I mean, it kind of brings us on to the meat of this, of who's responsible for bridging the gap and where does that happen, and, you know, what does it look like? And I've heard some. This has been a really fascinating conversation for us to be talking about and writing about at Insightflow, and because it feels very important, as I said in the introduction. So, I mean, so Zoe, I mean, in that piece, you know, what do you think researchers and research organisations, taking it from that end, need to be doing better?
Well, I think it's basically what Amanda said. They have to be very business focused and commercially aware. And any research that they do, the insights have to map back to the business objective and what that business is trying to achieve, so that people can clearly see, well, this insight is going to result in X moving this way or Y moving that way, or us achieving that. There has to be, we have to push. So I'm coming at it from an agency perspective, so I haven't got the luxury of being in a client organization. But for us to actually get to a point where the client can communicate with us and be very clear what they want out of the research, but also what their wider business objectives are, link those two things back, and then the insights can all map back to that. So already then you're starting to demonstrate and link back what the business is trying to achieve. If you don't do that, or you don't have a clear understanding of what the underlying business goals and challenges are, the research is never going to go anywhere. It might take us a couple of small boxes to validate something or uncover something small, but actually in terms of being seen as a long-term strategic influencing piece of work, if you don't tie it back to the business, it's never going to go anywhere. So that would be my first thing for, you know, what we try to do with our consultants, is that the first thing that we do is run that business goals and objectives workshop to try and understand what are genuinely the things that are keeping people up at night, and what can the research help influence or shape or guide or drive forward or push back on, or whatever it might be. And so that has to be the first step. So
you're talking there about a sort of an alignment, to create an alignment between the two sides. And just out of interest, from your position, what were the barriers against that? That feels like it's incredibly sensible. It feels like it should be completely natural behaviour. So what was it that was not happening that creates that insight adoption gap? Well, I think sometimes there is a gap. You know, we might be looking at something very specific around a digital product or an aspect of a digital journey or something like that. So sometimes people don't see that there is a direct correlation between overall what the business is trying to achieve, as well as that specific product area. And therefore they don't buy into being part of that research and collaborating on making sure that everybody is aligned at the beginning. You know, they see research as something that happens over there,
but don't really understand that that alignment at the beginning is make or break basically for the success of that research, I would say.
And Gideon, from your point of view, where do you see the barriers and the ways of getting around it occurring?
And so he's hit with the kind of commercial, understanding the commercial aspects of your client's business, you know, is so important. I think, you know, I've got a shopping list here, if you like, of all the things that can be done. I think a lot of them sort of would bridge, you know, researchers and clients, you know, in terms of things like collaboration and better communication. You know, we should reconsider how we debrief. You know, the presentation of key findings just doesn't cut the mustard anymore, does it? I think, you know, we need to be able to workshop with clients, help them develop a roadmap. I think one thing I'd say is that there isn't really on for kind of financial perspective, there isn't really an incentive for the researchers to sort of hang around and do that extra bit, is there? You know, where when they've delivered their research, you know, there is an additional job to transform that research finding or insight into a set of actions, and the research supplier, you know, isn't paid to do that bit, so they're off to do the next project for the next client, which I can perfectly well understand. But, you know, as a research supplier myself and having spent time client side, I think there is a bigger opportunity there, and the more time that a supplier can help hold the hand of their client to work out those actions and communicate, you know, and collaborate on that point, the better the relationship is going to be, the more likely that client's going to come back to you each time. You know, it's a 100% a commercial financial game there. You know, and I think probably. I'm speaking generally, but I suppose perhaps on the supply side, we and I include myself in that, we don't think about that enough. Of course, we should be recompensed for the time that we put in to the work that we do, and I'm not saying we would give time away for free, but I think, you know, take for instance the example of a debrief. You know, I would happily debrief a client 5 times if they needed me to, if it was, you know, to get that message around that business, you know, to speak and influence to as many people as possible. And I wouldn't, if, you know, unless I really had to, I wouldn't think about kind of charging individually for those debriefs. I would just be like, you know, here's the fee. Let me kind of, you know, speak to and influence as many people as I can possibly in your organization. It's good for me, it's good for you, you know. I think so that's one thing potentially. I think probably sharpening up recommendations, you know, which again all ties back to understanding the client's business. I think so yeah, that's where I've got to on that front.
I've heard this problem described as one of the aspects of it as the failure to tell stories properly, and a lack of empathy from the researchers. Somebody described the process of the researchers doing their data, doing their insight, and throwing it over a fence and running away, and not having that ability. So Amanda, do you think you would be able to persuade either Timing when you were there or any of your current client organizations to pay more for that storytelling, for that deeper reporting back?
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think this is where you have the sort of dilemma, which is why it sort of falls between actually the research or insight team that sit within the organization actually, and then the external supplier. And actually, from my experience, where those relationships worked really well together were the most successful, where there was less of a gap. I mean, there is always some sort of gap, but there was always less of a gap where there was a sort of a really strong collaboration. And for me, it is about sharing everything you possibly can about the business, about what we're trying to achieve, about the personalities actually and what they respond to within the business in order to make that piece of research work. But I suppose my sort of angle to this is it does also come from the sort of insight team who are leading that and propelling it forward within the business. And, you know, I was one of those annoying leaders that was like, right, these are the rules. And I've got a bit of a shopping list too, in the, you know, like if they don't know the numbers, and like that being more commercial, if they don't know what their numbers are and what their sort of overall objectives are, they can't brief the suppliers properly. So, you know, like it's that sort of ever sort of challenge, but they also need to be a lot more influential. So by their very nature, researchers are not the people that like to be on the front line. And actually a big part of what I tried to do with my teams over the years is actually sort of get them to build really sort of trusted relationships with stakeholders, because, you know, that's what makes you credible and sort of your insight memorable, when you can have those conversations about what's actually happening in a business and talk about how you can help. But that's also really then invaluable for you guys to kind of know all of that sort of information as well. But I think it's also about being accountable. So one of the rules that we had was you didn't work on a project unless there was a significant monetary return to that project. That really helps you prioritize your focus too internally. But actually, you know, we shouldn't be doing those things like those dreaded trackers that people just keep doing year on and year on and year on. We should be reviewing what we're doing constantly and sort of being accountable about what we do. And I think COVID actually, ironically, has provided the greatest opportunity to do that, because the research industry was completely disrupted at that point too. So, and I've seen that with all of my new clients as well, in that there is a really sort of big opportunity to show how we can help a business, and actually listening to your customer has never been more important. But I think the interesting point is because a lot of those briefs do come from insight teams, they aren't those natural sort of people. And so I think, you know, if you want to change that and reduce that gap, you have to look at your talent, and you have to look at supporting them with sort of skills and training to get them to be those people that can sort of help. But also there's tools that can help. And I mean, Insightflow is one of those tools that can help people.
Hopefully.
Yeah, because that can help people do their jobs easier. And, you know, like it's really, I mean, we did all sorts of things like colours, behaviours, because people, you know, but they are naturally, some analysts particularly are sort of naturally, they don't want to be presenting to people and pushing that through. So you've got to select your talent and recruit people to play to their best skills, basically. But yeah, a long list.
Well, as I said, and Zoe, I mean, that raises an interesting thing. When you were at Web Credible or in Vika now, are you looking at the makeup of your research teams to ensure that you have the storytellers and the perhaps the slightly more extrovert characters in the mix?
Yeah, I mean, most of the people on our experience design team would do research as well as design. They tend to be fairly blended. But we have invested an incredible amount of time in presentation skills, understanding businesses, understanding business outcomes and challenges. Absolutely. And, you know, asking the so what question. You know, you've done this research, here's what's come out of it. Well, so what for the client? What does that actually mean? What is the impact going to be on them? Are they going to be excited? You know, we talk about exciting and inspiring our clients, and that all links back to the results that the clients will get from the work that we do. So absolutely 100% making sure that our consultants understand what the starting point is. I think also just taking it one step forward, but also it goes back to that time element, making sure that we are, you know, research can be very expensive, and it can be a very expensive piece of a project, and it tends to be played down or squeezed a bit. But actually, where you need the most time is once you've done the research to actually draw the insights and do that collaborative piece with the clients. And that's the bit that gets squeezed. Oh, a half-day workshop. Well, no, we need a lot more than that to draw out those insights and turn that into that roadmap, that action list, whatever it is for the client. And that's we're still not very good at this, by the way, in terms of costing this well. But that thinking time needs time. And so, you know, right back from there, and as you say, then investing in the staff so that they can tell those stories, but draw the right insights that matter to that business.
I think it was you, Amanda, who in one of the original conversations with us said that businesses don't actually want insight or research. What they want to do is make decisions and make evidence-based decisions. Yeah. And it feels to me that is something that's quite often lost in the mix, that research.
it's about talking in the same language as your CEO, because your CEO doesn't wake up every morning and go, right, what am I going to do with my insight team today? To be fair, I'd love them to think that the me first thing when they, but they don't. And actually it's our job to kind of talk in the language, and recognise the pressures and the focus that they have, and help them run the business. Really, I mean, that is in effect what we're trying to do. And you don't have a successful business unless you are talking to your customers. And I think that's the other thing that you've got to be mindful of with all of this. You do need to listen to them, particularly at the moment.
So I do remember a time, and I remember at the time thinking this was career limiting, but when I was at EMAP before it dissolved finally, going to see a presentation by a very good market research agency and passing the editor of the publication that we'd been doing the research on, and sitting around him saying, aren't you coming to this research presentation? And he looked at customers don't know anything anyway. No. And so it kind of brings us on to the other aspect of it is we're all talking here about the methods and the ways of thinking that researchers need to go through to have more impact. What do we need to do on the client side to either get them to buy better, to engage with the process better, or whatever it is, to sort of bring in impact and make it work for them? So I'll start with you, Amanda. I mean, this is your world. So apart from going and shouting at teams and connecting it, making sure it was connected to real money, what else do you think was needed from the client side, whether it's buying or listening to research, to make it have more impact?
So it was really interesting, because I was thinking about this sort of question before, and actually I still think the onus is majorly on the internal sort of stakeholders that are commissioning the research, rather than the key stakeholders at the top of the chain, if that makes sense. In that, I'd love, like I said to you, I'd love for the CEO to wake up and think this is what I'm going to do with Insight, or I'd love for them to go, I am going to spend 6 hours of my day and do a whole workshop with consumers, but they just aren't going to. And actually, there's a lot of discussion around, but clients just don't ask the right questions. And it's like, well, no, but that's because they need somebody like a research team or a research supplier to sit with them to work out what the right questions are. Like, it's that sort of consultancy. So for me, whether it's a supplier or an internal team, you've kind of got to get to that relationship of like a trusted advisor or a trusted partner. And actually, the more you do generates more credibility, more authority, more value, that actually then they start to wake up and listen. And it's almost by like working with them. And it is a really slow process. And for you guys, it must be really frustrating, because it's slow, and actually it's always the way that you guys will work will be project by project as well. So there's a natural start and an end date. But I think reaching that sort of trusted advisor status, so I sort of firmly believe the onus is on the researchers in whatever shape, whether it's the internal team or the suppliers, but that actually you move your clients to a position, or your key stakeholders, where you've proved your value and you've proved the credibility by working with them. And that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight.
Of course. And Zoe, from your point of view, you've been managing director of, and now incredibly senior in businesses. How do you go about that relationship building? What is it that you guys are doing to try and smooth the path as you go forward?
So many things. I mean, again, shopping list. We have our shopping list. I suppose it's, like I said at the beginning, it's understanding the expectations of the client and how research fits into their organization, so that we can then start to plan how we work with them to actually make an impact. And this can be anything from bringing people on the journey with us, making sure that they come and watch the research, so that the CEO does sit in for a couple of hours watching customer interviews and actually sees somebody like tearing their hair out trying to use the website or whatever that might be. So we've got a whole stage of things that is all about demonstrating the value of research and bringing people on the journey with them, and trying to highlight you know, it's never going to be the same if you're not talking about their organization. But there are so many cases where research has made a big impact, you know, where we've saved a client spending hundreds of thousands on new technology because they assumed their customers wanted live pricing, but actually the customer was happy with a range, for example. So a whole legacy system didn't have to be replaced. Things like the, you know, I don't want to go through our case studies, that's not what this is about, but the Dulux visualizer, which was a really innovative piece of work that we were part of creating, came out of research. It was just research that was just to try and improve the Dulux app. And what came out of it was this really spectacular piece of innovation. So it's trying to demonstrate, you know, while managing expectations as well, what research can do or what can add to your business. But I think really it's understanding who the champions are within that business and working with them to make sure that they are engaging the right stakeholders in the right way in their organization so that we get what we need to do a great job. And if we don't have that and we don't have those stakeholders or that champion within the client organization, it's very hard for us to make that impact or to have that ongoing relationship where we do become a trusted partner. And that also research isn't seen as one project end. It's actually a continuous process of gathering insight and data that will help drive business decisions and you know, introduce new products or change the way you do services. It can do so much, and it doesn't just end after a 2-week project or a 4-week project. So, you know, there's a mountain to climb, but where clients understand the value of research, it's amazing what you can do. Where they don't, it's only ever going to go so far, unfortunately.
And that actually, that's a really nice link into the question I was going to ask you, Gideon. As somebody from a relatively smaller organization, and therefore perhaps without the luxury of the manpower to do this. First of all, what do you look for in a good client? You know, what are the signs you're looking for in a good client? Because presumably, and I may be wrong here, but I'm assuming that you don't have the luxury to do an awful lot of what might be pre-sales relationship building. So what are you looking for in a good client, and what do you do when you suddenly realize that they might not be a good client?
What do I look for in a good client? I think well, I'm working with the client at the moment. This is not me making this up to sound cheesy, but they are really, they're sort of my ideal client, and the way that I'm not going to embarrass them. They're not on the call anyway, but if they was to see this, I wouldn't want to embarrass them. But they have they're a young, kind of successful, growing business, and they're busy managing all of their growth, and they just sort of have missed the customer discovery part of a piece, you know, and they don't have their own internal insight team. They've got a marketing team, and they really, you know, they really need a partner. So that's, you know, that's what I really enjoy. That, you know, when you're working with somebody closely and they're using you for your research experience and skills, but also as a more of a, I guess, a kind of advisor as much as anything. So that, you know, when you feel wanted, I think, I suppose, if you boil that down, when clients really want you, I think that's a good thing. I think, you know, when you identify, what was it, the other part of the question, what happens when things go wrong?
So what happens when you find a client and suddenly realize that they're perhaps not as receptive to the process as you might like them to be?
Oh, you run away. I get, what I happen to get a lot is because, you know, you were kind in the way you described my business as being relatively smaller. It's literally smaller, but I tend to match up with organisations that are small or medium sized, and often they haven't done research before, so there's a lot of hand holding needs to be done. And I don't mean hand holding in a kind of parent-child, you know, it's literally guiding them through the process, because we make it such a complicated process. It doesn't, you know, and so it's kind of simplifying them and guiding them through that is very important for me, because it allays the problems and the difficulties that you get later on. You know, if you can communicate well with them and inform them as to why things happen in this order, or why you're recommending things happen in that order, then it obviously mitigates things going wrong in down the line. So that's what I would suggest.
So question to you. I mean, we've been talking for most of this at, I think, probably from a relatively senior level, and certainly as somebody who's somewhat more senior than the rest of you, in one sense. What if you were going to give advice to a more junior world? I mean, the market research sector is huge, and there's a very large number of people who are starting out or trying to identify how they go about this better. And I think we've said one of the things that every market researcher needs to move towards is being a storyteller, is whether it's formal presentation skills, what have you. If you're going to give them advice, about how they as individuals, whether they're in small organizations or insights in a large corp, how they go about starting to close this insight adoption gap, what sorts of things do they need to do for themselves or for the people around them? You're going to give them advice about that. I'll start with you, Zoe, on that, because I suspect that as having run and trained teams, that's been at the forefront of your minds.
Yeah, well, I think it's back to what we've been saying. It's about that business and commercial acumen, understanding the commercial reality of a business. And I think that's a key word, the reality. I think sometimes research can be in a bubble, and you focus on that, the methodology, getting the right questions, getting the right outputs. But actually, it's where that research sits within the reality of that organization. So really focusing on that business acumen is the most important thing. And I think that's certainly something that's tripped us up over the years, where people can be quite idealistic about the work that they do, and they take great pride in the research that they do, and rightly so. But actually, it just doesn't match to what the customer is expecting or needing from that research. And that's where it all falls down. So I think bridging that gap is the most important thing I would say to people. And, you have to collaborate with people. I think it's a given in any role. Nobody can operate in a silo. Nobody should operate in a silo anymore. No matter who you are, researcher, business and finance, whatever team you are, you need to work with other people to get the best results. And so collaboration would be number 2 on my list, because everybody brings something to the table. And the more I think, Amanda, I now feel like I'm just stealing what everybody else said. But you understand the business. We always say we have to collaborate with clients because they bring an expertise around their business, and we bring an expertise around research, design, whatever it is that we bring to the table. And only when you truly work collaboratively do you get the best results. And so it's not even an option not to collaborate. The days of suppliers on one side and clients over there are nearly gone. They're definitely going. Not quite gone, but they're definitely getting better.
And Amanda, if you've got a junior in an insight team, what would you be saying to them?
So I think I'd like my sort of number 1 goes back to the commercial, just to sort of echo more of what Zoe's saying, in that start with the outcome and start with what you need to sort of prove. I almost think that when you start on a project, you're like doing research on the people that you're working with in a bizarre way, in that you're almost doing the research on the business or even the research agency that you're working with, actually, in order to ensure that they're the right ones. So be really outcome focused. I think the second thing is empowering people. So I think Gideon, you mentioned about how we make everything too complicated, and actually, we can't be gatekeepers and put stuff in cupboards and hide it away. Our job is to sort of, one of the first things I would do when I had a new recruit, talk about how they had to share the news and the successes, and empower people to use that sort of research and insight sort of constantly, day to day, within their business. And I suppose that sort of leads on to the final point about just being proactive, in that there are, I've heard so many sort of junior sort of execs and team members say, but the business didn't ask for it. And it's like, so what? just do it. If you find something that's really useful, you find a valuable insight, like the Dulux one, just go and tell people. So that would be my sort of, it's sort of a combination of the commercial, but the activation of that commercial thinking as well.
Sure. And for you, Gideon, if you're advising one of those more junior people coming into the world, what would you be asking or saying to them?
I think I'm just thinking back a long time to my junior days. What would have benefited me? I think what I valued most in my early part of my career, I started out at BMRB on a team of grads, and we had each other. We had each other to sort of ask questions that we daren't ask anyone else, or socialize, or support each other. So a sort of peer support network. And I think I was just thinking about this as we were talking. It's a mentoring system. Is there an opportunity for a buddy system? As an agency researcher, could you buddy up with a junior client side researcher? And just, I think it's all about empathy, isn't it? And we've talked about collaboration. I think we absolutely echo what's been said already about collaboration. Empathy, understanding what it's like on the other side, if you don't already, and hey, hello.
Hey Rex, how are you?
And spending some time in other people's shoes, essentially. It's so easy to see things across the fence differently to how things are on the other side of the fence.
Cool. And sorry, before I go into the question, I'd just say to everybody, if you have any questions for these guys at the moment, please do stick them in the Q&A on the screen, and we'll get to them as if you have any questions. I was just wondering, so in the final bit, what we're talking about, what seems to be very much the message here, is that bridging the insight-Dobson gap is actually mostly about what I might call soft skills. I don't know if that's fair. And it intrigues me to think, do you think the research industry recruits for, teaches, or looks for those soft skills in enough depth at the moment? And if not, what might they be doing to look at that? So again, Amanda, I'll ask you first, because on that one, when you were recruiting people into your Insights team, were you looking for those soft skills? Was it something that was part of the process?
Yeah, I mean, if I look back over the years and the different teams that I've built, and obviously it's sort of with the evolution of research, where it's been about insight, storytelling, data analysis. Like it goes through sort of various sort of phases of development. I think our sort of whole approach to recruitment changed. So, when you're looking for an analyst, you are looking for an analyst that can also share the data and make it meaningful to an internal client, but also, that is happy to present and feels comfortable present. Now, not everybody does though. And I think I mentioned in an earlier thing around talent management, that whole sort of talent management side becomes really, really important. And you can't find like millions of unicorns that tick every single box out in the market. And actually what you sort of end up going back to is recruiting people based on what's the need for your team and what's that need to do for the business. So I would say particularly the sort of last sort of 3 to 5 years, that became more and more important, that you get the right person. And it is those softer skills actually. And I'm not saying they're easy to find either, but it is finding those sort of, it's the people that can unlock the magic that Zoe mentioned right up front, actually, is that those are the people that you're trying to secure, actually.
Fascinating. And for you, Zoe, I mean, creating teams as well and creating a very successful agency and now working for a very much bigger corporation as well. What were you looking for? Were you actively looking for those soft skills as you were bringing in more junior people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a given really for us, because everybody who would work within the team is client facing. There are very few people that deliver and aren't client facing. So certainly we would be looking for the aptitude and the will to be those storytellers, to do that collaborative work, not somebody who doesn't want to interact with clients in that way. So yeah, and as I said, we've invested a lot of time to make sure that we are consistently having the right skills in place. You know, we do a weekly session to make sure that people are getting the confidence, and we are empowering them to actually stand up and be able to communicate what they found and be very proud of what they found, but also to demonstrate the value of the work that they do, because sometimes you just do it. And actually it was our client at Tesco, I think Amanda, you mentioned Tesco, who said, but yes, what is the impact of the work that you're doing? You need to put that into commercial terms. And it was that client that helped us to really start thinking in that way and communicate back our I think, Gideon, you said key findings. You know, you don't just do, here's your key findings. Here's your key findings, and this is why you need to care about this, or this is where the opportunity is for you, or this is what it means in terms of that objective that you had. So it's really, you know, people need to have a grasp of turning their work into something meaningful, and that's what I'd be looking for, that people have the ability, or certainly they want to do that kind of thing.
Fascinating. And for you, Gideon, can you imagine a junior researcher now coming into the industry who is not expected in some way to be client facing?
No, I guess not. I think even when I started out, quickly got in front of clients, and maybe a bit too quickly in some instances, but yeah, no, I think so. I think we're asking a lot, aren't we, here? You know, we're asking for good research and analytical skills. I would say soft skills almost downplays these really important skills. I'd say more sort of business skills. We are asking a lot. So whether that means we need to create specialists within their own teams, or you know, yeah, I think what we don't want to lose is that kind of hunger and interest in research. I think, you know, that we need some of that. You know, maybe you lock it away in a cupboard in the agency and let it out when you need it. But, you know, I remember particular characters that were in my early agency days who were just, without them, you know, we wouldn't be pushing new methods, we wouldn't be innovating. And I think there's a danger with not just the research industry, but across all industries, that we're losing some skills. So I wouldn't want to see that. I wouldn't want to see us lose that kind of special, real nerdiness.
Yeah. So what we're looking for here is a whole group of extrovert data geeks.
Yeah, basically, yeah. An Avengers, an eclectic bunch of Avengers, yeah.
So then, very quickly, as the last question here, and I'm almost deliberately asking a closed question here. Do you see that this insight adoption gap will close quickly in the next 2 or 3 years? Amanda?
You just want a yes or a no?
Well, it was a fairly close question, but you're allowed to explain your thinking if you wish to. So
maybe is the answer. I'm going to go right down the middle. And the reason I say maybe is because there's just too many sort of external sort of context and pressures that sort of influence it. And I think every business is so different, and every business challenge is so different. And from my experience, I actually think the struggle, I'm going to call it the struggle, or that gap, is actually quite a healthy thing sometimes to have, because it actually makes you sort of work harder as a researcher to sort of overcome it. So my maybe probably says the negative elements of it, yes, I think COVID will be a big accelerator of that. But I think that does have positive elements too, that just it does incentivize people to make change happen.
Excellent stuff. Zoe, what do you think on that one?
I think it will close a bit, but not completely. Also hanging out in the middle of the fence. But I think, you know, it's not just down to researchers, it's also about organizations and how they use data. And there's been so much in the last, 10 years about, you know, all of the data that organizations are collecting, whether that's through analytics, through to, you know, big data mines, through to user research, to qualitative stuff that people do. But a lot of that data just sits there and nothing really gets done with it. So even though the gap might close a little bit, there is as much of an onus on clients or organizations to figure out how they use data well and get the right data that will actually drive their business forward in the right way. And I think we're too much in the middle of so much data still, and more coming all of the time, that it will take more than 2 or 3 years to close that gap, is what I'm going to say. So okay. There, I said no, actually, in the end, I think.
Yeah, well, that's good. And Gideon, as the framer of the idea of the insight adoption gap, I leave the last word in this to you. What are your thoughts? Is it closing? Will it close?
If it doesn't close, it's do or die. Let's be dramatic as a final thought. I think if it doesn't close, the industry, and maybe having this conversation, I'm not aggrandizing our conversation, but maybe having some more of these debates and discussions is a good thing, because it's getting it out in the open. And I think unless we can prove ourselves as more than just suppliers of research and findings, then we are going to die off. I think I see at the moment there's a sort of existential thing going on within marketing. There's this hashtag "this is marketing" flying around because marketeers have identified the fact that they don't really know what they do, and because what they do has changed so dramatically because of digitalization and the internet and everything. It's like, what is marketing anymore? And I suppose you could easily transfer that conundrum to what is research and insight anymore, because we have all this data and we have access to data that we didn't have before, and we've got data science as a branch of growing its fields exponentially. Everyone's hiring data scientists. I think we do it, and hopefully we'll all get to retire before that happens. But yeah, do or die.
Excellent stuff. Well, guys, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. That was fascinating, and feels like there's an awful lot more conversation to go in this, and there's an awful lot more detail and what have you to be had from it. So, but thank you very much. Really interesting, really useful, and great fun. Thank you all for joining us on this, the first Insightflow Cafe community event. The next one will be in about 3 weeks' time, where I shall be talking to the Brian Lavelle, who's the managing director of Big Sofa Technologies in the States. And we're going to be looking at technology coming into market research and what's the impact of technology on market research and what are the barriers and the various other aspects of that. Doing a chat with Brian from Big Sofa Technologies. So we will be promoting that shortly. Hope to see you then, but please do come and join us in the Wonder.me cafe for at least 10 or 15 minutes. And to the rest of you, thank you very much, guys. Really lovely to see you all. And at some point I will buy you all the wine that I've been promising. It's going to be a big 6 months.